His background and mental condition led him to act with little understanding of the consequences. Serving a sentence in a drug and alcohol detention center, he cut off his ankle bracelet and escaped to Yuendumu. This could only end with his arrest and return to custody. Former Canberra grammar student Rolfe spent 5 years in the army, including a tour of duty in Afghanistan, before in 2016 joining the NT Police. His military and police training centered on remaining calm and assessing options, while Walker had to fend for himself. Zachary Rolfe with then Governor-General Peter Cosgrove in early 2019, after the officer's 2016 river rescue. A week after arriving at Alice Springs, the new probationary constable rescued 2 tourists swept away in the flooded Hugh River. After first saving one found near the bridge, Rolfe, wearing only pink underpants, floated and swam more than 6 kilometers before reaching the second, who was clinging to a tree with a broken hand. When she told him she couldn't swim, he put her on his back to reach safety. At this point, Rolfe was the NT Police's golden child and interstater, who moved to the outback to do good. He volunteered for the Immediate Response Team, a group deployed to dangerous scenes. It was an added responsibility to his role as a general duties officer. At induction, he hit every target in firearms training and was soon considered a key member of the IRT. On November 6, 2019, Yuendumu police tried to arrest Walker. When they approached, Walker charged with an axe, and they stepped aside to let him run past. Their response was appropriate, as their training stresses keeping distance from an offender with a sharp weapon. In Victoria, police recruits are given a training drill. An instructor armed with a red pen plays an offender while the recruit, wearing a white t-shirt, has to take defensive action. At the end of the exercise, the t-shirt is always slashed with red marks, showing that someone with a knife coming forward moves faster than a police officer moving backwards. The safe distance is usually considered at least 7 meters. Well-intentioned critics question why police are trained to use guns if the offender is only armed with a knife. Australian Institute of Criminology figures show of the 278 homicides in Australia in 2019-20, 104 were from stab wounds and 35 from gunshots. Because of Walker's threatening response, local police called for the Alice Springs IRT to make the arrest. This was when Rolfe became involved. Requests to use local police as backup were refused. A message was sent through the community to ask Walker to surrender at the police station. He told an elder he would surrender, but not until after the funeral of a community member on Saturday, November 9th. This message was apparently not passed to police. Despite concerns, the arrest occurred on November 9th, straight after the funeral. Some police recommended it should be set for the following morning. As a constable, it was not Rolfe's call. The atmosphere was so tense the government medical team left Yuendumu that morning because of safety concerns due to community unrest. Evidence was given at Rolfe's trial that if the medics had been there, it is probable Walker would have survived. Rolfe's bodycam showed a composed police officer approaching the suspect, who denied he was Walker. He was placed against a wall where his face was checked against a phone photo. Once identity was confirmed, he was told to put his hands behind his back. If there is any criticism of Rolfe at this stage, it is not that he is too aggressive, but not aggressive enough. His deliberately relaxed approach allowed Walker to put his hand in his right pocket to grab a pair of medical scissors and stab Rolfe in the shoulder. With no distance between them, Rolfe stepped back and fired one shot, hitting Walker, who continued to struggle with a second officer on the ground. Rolfe fired 2 more shots. The officers forced the weapon from the wounded man and attempted first aid. They took him to the police station, a short distance away. In the back of the police vehicle, Walker asked for help and Rolfe assured him, "I've got you, brother." At the station, ill-equipped police attempted to save Walker's life. An hour after he was shot. Family members maintain they should have been taken inside the police station to comfort the dying man, but Walker's uncle Derek Williams would later tell the Supreme Court, People was yelling and screaming and wanted to throw rocks at the station. And yeah, I just calmed everybody down. A Melbourne protest over the of Kumanjayi Walker, on November 13, 2019, the same day Constable Zach Rolfe was charged with David Crosling Walkers occurred the year before the of George Floyd in Minneapolis, which created the worldwide Black Lives Matter protests. Walkers sparked similar outrage around Australia, with mass rallies and calls for justice. Meanwhile, in Yuendumu, investigators were viewing police body cam footage and interviewing witnesses. But what they lacked were civilian eyewitnesses. There was no one to dispute Rolfe's version of events. It all came down to Rolfe's body cam, a blurry record of the 3 seconds from the first shot to the third. Detectives' preliminary findings were that the use of fatal force is justified. They added that there were no reasonable grounds for arrest of Rolfe. Those investigators were replaced within 36 hours. The Northern Territory's Chief Minister, Michael Gunner. Alex Ellinghausen. It was, of course, an internal inquiry that would have done nothing to placate the community until those conclusions could be independently tested at a public hearing. 3 days after the and 1 day before Rolfe was charged, Northern Territory Chief Minister Michael Gunner and NT Police Commissioner Jamie Chalker flew to Yuendumu on a private plane. Gunner told the community consequences will flow. Even though the use of fatal force was initially judged as justified, and the investigation was incomplete, and Rolfe was not an escape risk, he was charged with 4 days after the. Was he charged on the evidence, or to satisfy community demand and stop possible riots? It is unclear who made the decision, but, under the doctrine of the office of constable, the arresting officer must reasonably believe the suspect committed the offence. The initial investigators did not reach that threshold. One of the Fresh team wrote there was a direction to charge Rolfe with. The Director of Public Prosecutions was approached for advice and for reasons yet to be explained did not provide a written opinion. Though homicide detectives are trained to be prodigious note-takers, the Assistant Commissioner in charge of the Rolfe investigation took no notes relating to crucial meetings that lead to the decision to arrest. Constable Zachary Rolfe leaving court on the first day of his trial for the of 19-year-old Kumanjayi Walker. Zach Hope. The usual standard for launching a prosecution is that it is more likely than not to be successful. Some argue that in controversial cases, even a weak prosecution allows the facts to be aired in court to show transparency. But this case could have been heard in the coroner's court with broader rules of evidence than in the Supreme Court. An inquest is the search for the truth. A criminal prosecution does not examine what happened, but what is provable. The age approached 6 experienced former homicide investigators, and each said they would have prepared the case for inquest. So why charge Rolfe after an investigation that took little more than a long weekend? He wanted to return to Canberra, and senior police feared it would be difficult to arrest him outside the territory. In reality, they panicked. Rolfe's trial took 5 weeks and the prosecution called 40 witnesses, including experts, to provide opinions. When Rolfe was charged, it was based on the bodycam record of the vital 3 seconds. The reconstructions, forensic testimony, and scientific conclusions came later. Despite public outrage, the racial overtones and the detailed brief of evidence, at law this was a simple case. Did Rolfe reasonably fear for his life and the life of his colleague? If the answer was yes, then he was not guilty. If not, he was guilty of homicide. The Crown case was that Rolfe's first shot was justified, but the next 2.6 seconds later, and then 0.5 seconds after that were not. It was that he formed OU's intent, or showed reckless indifference in those seconds while Walker, still armed, wrestled on the ground with a second officer. It was an argument rejected unanimously by the jury. On March 11, Rolfe was acquitted of the lesser charges of manslaughter and engaging in a violent act causing. Yet he remains on forced leave, facing 11 internal disciplinary charges, with more to follow. Loading it has now emerged that after he was charged, police launched an internal investigation into Rolfe, checking his notes